Something has been feeling off lately, not in a loud, obvious way. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet shift you can't fully explain. You wake up, go through your day, talk to people, smile when you're supposed to, but something inside doesn't quite line up anymore. It's like you're watching yourself from a slight distance, noticing patterns you never questioned before. At first, you ignore it. You tell yourself it's just stress, or maybe you're overthinking. But the feeling doesn't go away. It lingers in small moments, in the way conversations feel scripted, in the way certain reactions no longer feel natural, in the strange awareness that you're not fully present in your own life. And then, without warning, a thought appears. What if this version of me isn't really me? It's not a comfortable thought. In fact, most people avoid it entirely. Because if you follow that question, even a little bit, it starts to unravel things you've always taken for granted. Your personality, your preferences, the way you respond to people, the role you play in relationships. You start to notice how much of it feels learned. You laugh at things you don't actually find funny. You agree when you don't fully mean it. You hold back parts of yourself without even realizing you're doing it. And the more you observe, the harder it becomes to ignore. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about realizing you may have been performing all along. And here's the part no one tells you. This realization doesn't come with clarity. It comes with discomfort, with confusion, with a strange sense of loss, like something familiar is slowly slipping away, even if it was never truly yours to begin with. But what you're feeling right now isn't you falling apart. It's you starting to see. The strange thing about identity is that it rarely feels constructed. It feels natural, obvious, as if it has always been there. But if you look closely, you begin to see how much of it was shaped long before you were even aware of it. Think back to the earliest versions of yourself, not the memories you clearly remember, but the subtle patterns you carried. The need to be accepted, the instinct to adapt, the quiet understanding of what made people approve of you and what didn't. You didn't sit down and decide who to become. You adjusted. Maybe you learned to be the calm one because conflict made things worse. Maybe you became the funny one because it brought attention and softened tension. Maybe you stayed quiet because speaking up never seemed worth the risk. None of this felt like a choice. It felt like survival. And over time, these adjustments stopped feeling like strategies. They became your personality. They became the way you introduced yourself to the world, and eventually the way you saw yourself. But here's where it gets complicated. What works to protect you doesn't always reflect who you truly are. It reflects what kept things stable. So when people say, "This is just who I am," they're often describing a version of themselves that was shaped by repetition, not truth. A version that made sense in a certain environment at a certain time. And now, something inside you is starting to question it. That's why things feel unfamiliar, not because you're lost, but because you're noticing the difference between what feels natural and what was simply practiced. And once you see that difference, even for a moment, it becomes impossible to fully go back to not seeing it. This is the part most people don't talk about. What happens after you start seeing it? At first, there's a sense of clarity, almost relief, like you've uncovered something important about yourself. But that clarity doesn't stay clean for long. It starts to blur into something more complicated, because once you realize parts of you were built, you begin to question all of it. Your reactions, your opinions, even your emotions. You catch yourself mid-conversation, wondering if what you just said actually came from you or from habit. You notice how quickly you adjust depending on who you're around, how easily you shift tone, energy, even beliefs, just to maintain a certain balance, and it starts to feel unstable, not in a dangerous way, but in a disorienting one. Like the ground beneath you isn't as solid as you thought, like the person you've been relying on might not be as fixed as you assumed. Some people panic at this stage. They try to rebuild a stronger version of themselves quickly. They look for new labels, new identities, something to replace what feels like it's fading. But that only creates another layer, another version that eventually feels just as constructed. Because the point isn't to replace one identity with another. It's to pause, to sit in the uncertainty long enough to understand it. And that's uncomfortable. There's no script for this part, no clear direction, just awareness, quiet, persistent awareness, showing you patterns you use to move through automatically. But this discomfort has a purpose. It's not breaking you, it's removing what was never stable to begin with. As this awareness deepens, something unexpected begins to happen. You start to notice the gap between what you feel and what you express, between what you think and what you say out loud, between what you want and what you allow yourself to choose. It's subtle at first, easy to overlook, but once you see it clearly, it's everywhere. You say yes when your instinct says no. You stay in conversations that drain you. You hold back opinions that feel real, replacing them with safer ones. And for the first time, you don't just do it automatically. You notice yourself doing it. That awareness changes everything. Because now, it's no longer unconscious. And when something becomes conscious, it loses its ability to fully control you. But it also creates tension. You feel the pull between who you've been and what feels more honest in the moment. And that tension can feel heavy. It can make simple decisions feel more complicated. It can make interactions feel slower, more deliberate. Some people interpret this as losing themselves, but that's not what's happening. You're not losing who you are. You're losing the distance between what you feel and what you show. And that process isn't smooth. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in pauses, in hesitations, in choices that feel slightly different than they used to. It's not dramatic, but it's real. And over time, those small shifts begin to reshape something deeper than behavior. They begin to reshape your relationship with yourself. At some point, a quieter realization starts to settle in. You don't actually need to rebuild yourself. That urgency you felt in the beginning, the need to define, to label, to figure everything out, begins to fade. Not because you've found all the answers, but because you've stopped trying to force them. You start to understand that not knowing isn't a problem. It's space. Space where you're no longer reacting automatically. Space where you're not constantly adjusting to meet expectations you haven't even questioned. Space where something more natural has room to emerge, not as a fixed identity, but as a process. And this changes the way you move through the world. You listen differently, not just to others, but to yourself. You notice what feels aligned and what doesn't, without immediately trying to justify or ignore it. You allow pauses where there used to be instant reactions. There's less performance, less effort to maintain a version of yourself. And in that space, something unexpected appears, a sense of quiet stability, not the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are, but the kind that comes from not needing to constantly prove it. You begin to trust your responses, not because they're perfect, but because they're present. And that trust doesn't come from building something new. It comes from removing what was never fully yours. By now, something has shifted, not in a way that others would immediately notice. On the outside, you might seem the same. You still move through your routines, still interact with the same people, still live within the same structure. But internally, it's different. There's more awareness in the way you think, more intention in the way you respond, less automatic movement, less unconscious repetition. And even though things may still feel uncertain at times, that uncertainty doesn't carry the same weight it once did, because now you understand something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You understand that who you thought you were was never fixed. It was shaped, adapted, repeated, and what you're experiencing now isn't the loss of identity, it's the loosening of it. You're not becoming someone new. You're stepping away from what was never entirely you. And that process doesn't end with a final version of yourself. There's no moment where everything locks into place and stays there permanently. Instead, there's something more subtle, a continuous awareness, a quiet ability to notice when you're aligning and when you're drifting. That awareness becomes your anchor, not a rigid identity, not a role, just the ability to see clearly. And maybe that's what this was always about, not finding yourself, but finally no longer pretending to be someone you're not.